Good morning, guys, and welcome back. This is the next little segment of our Know Your Rights course, and today we'll be talking about the Fifth Amendment. All right, but before we begin, something came up after the last little video on the Fourth Amendment, and remember, the Fourth Amendment is your right against unreasonable search and seizure. And when I spoke about having law enforcement having access to your home, um, they either had to have a search warrant or your consent. All right, so the question came up, well, what if you see somebody run into a house? Can you chase after them? Yes and no. Okay, that is what's called hot pursuit. And if a law enforcement officer is actively pursuing someone and they physically see them run into a house, can they enter the home without a search warrant and without consent? Yes, they can. There could be tactical reasons why that's not advised. Um, Sometimes they will choose to run into the home, sometimes they won't. But if they physically see it, then yes, they can. Now, at any point in time, if that law enforcement officer loses sight of that suspect and they just assume they ran into this house, then no, they cannot enter the house without consent or without a search warrant. All right. So hopefully that cleared that up. Um, but real quick, I want to give a shout out, a couple shout outs before we talk about the Fifth Amendment. All right. Um, my buddy Jason Quinn, all right. He is a former Marine recon officer, which makes him 110% more of a badass than I ever was when I was in the Marine Corps. I was a comms guy. I was a pogue. I always tell people that I got my combat action just from being in the way wrong place at the way wrong. Well, I guess the wrong place at the right time, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, I was by no means a badass. But anyways, uh, my buddy's down in Georgia, and he and his son have an awesome company. All right, Bunker Skateboards. All right, he sent me get that in the frame. All right, he sent me some swag. He sent me this awesome sticker. All right, he didn't have to do that, so I do appreciate it. He sent a couple of them. I've got that one on my water bottle. My wife's got one on her water bottle. But anyways, just check out what he's doing. Veteran-owned company uh, with skateboarding, and also there's another gentleman that I want to give a shout out to, and I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing his name right. Steve Connerton. All right. Uh, Jason turned me on to him, and basically he's part of Skateboarding Saves Lives. All right. And you know that actually I work now, I'm not in law enforcement, I work in public health. Okay. So what is part of public health? Mental health. I know right now you're giving classes on the Constitution. What does this have to do with public health? I will actually, believe it or not, try to tie it all in at the end. Um, but whether childhood trauma, military veterans, post-traumatic stress, anything, right? Skateboarding can be a great outlet. All right, there's tons of good outlets. I suffered from alcoholism at one point in time. While I didn't use skateboarding, I did actually use some other more healthy outlets. All right, to help me stop drinking. Skateboarding is one of these outlets that can help you. All right, so Steve Connerton, check out what he's got going on. All right, now on to the show. The Fifth Amendment, handy dandy pocket constitution. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on the presentment of indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against themselves, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. There's a lot to kind of unpack there, all of which is important. However, again, if you remember, if you've been watching these videos from the beginning, this is as it pertains to your interaction with law enforcement. Okay, so I'm going to go over the right against self-incrimination. All right, and basically, what does that mean? The Fifth Amendment means that the state, the government, can't make you testify or offer evidence against yourself. All right. Uh, any fellow old heads back there out there remember watching the Chappelle Show? And they had the one skit where the drug dealer testifies in front of Congress and he pleads the fifth. You know, he's like one, two, three, four, fifth. That guy. All right, that's all right. It's one of my favorite of the Chappelle Show skits. Um, that and the Prince one. I actually prefer the Prince Charlie Murphy Prince skit over Rick James, which I know you guys wanted to know watching this video, but it's 6:30 in the morning. I was going to throw it in there. All right. So, and basically, you can plead the fifth. You can take the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution exception and not have to testify against yourself. All right. Um, that's where Miranda Warning comes into play. All right. If Miranda versus Arizona, all right, is a 1966 Supreme Court case. All right. And it's where Miranda rights came from. All right. And don't get me wrong, Mr. Miranda was a scumbag, real piece of trash. He was a rapist. Um, and basically, what happened was he was caught, and um, you know, through interrogation by the police, he confessed to his crimes. And I think also, I think some victims had picked him out of a lineup as well. So he goes off to prison, and while he's sitting there, whether it was him or a jailhouse lawyer, they were like, "Hey, man, I think if you knew that you had the right to an attorney, um, which people did back then, but law enforcement wasn't necessarily required to tell you that. You were just supposed to know, through growing up taking civics in school. I don't know, but um, he's like, I bet if you had an attorney, he would advise you not to talk to the police, which you may have been found not guilty." He's like, you know what? You're probably right. So he gets an attorney, and they take it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agrees. All right. Um, Now, I think the world made it right. Don't get me wrong. I think Miranda rights are very important, but also in the case of Mr. Miranda, he did get out of prison uh, because of the whole Miranda right decision. But he, like I said, he was a scumbag, and he actually got killed in a bar several years later. So, you know, the world kind of took care of itself in that one. But your rights are very important. Okay, let's go over our rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. Do you understand these rights? All right. And after a police officer reads you those, you know, and make sure he or she makes sure that you understand, they can just start asking you questions. All right. You don't have to answer them. And at any point in time, you say, I don't want to answer your questions, or I want a lawyer. They have to stop asking you questions. But I want to get this right because I've actually gotten fights. I've had use of forces. I've gotten tussles on the side of the road trying to take people into custody. All right, because they're like, well, on Law and Order or CSI or NCIS or whatever. And I'm like, that's TV. Those are fictional characters, bro. Or another one would be like, well, my cousin said. I'm like, look, dog. Unless your cousin graduated from law school, I don't want to hear it. And nevertheless, nobody wants to hear it on the side of the road at a traffic stop, anyways. All right. So now, certain jurisdictions and certain agencies have different policies about when an officer has to read you your Miranda rights. Okay. And it is a little bit of a gray area. That's why certain agencies have different policies, certain jurisdictions, certain DA's office wants you to do it a certain way. Okay. Because it is a big question of, well, if I'm detained and I'm not free to leave, am I considered to be in custody? Do I have to be read my Miranda rights? So it it is kind of an evolving issue. All right, but as it stands right now, and again, your agency that you work for, or your DA's office, or your judicial district may make it a little more restrictive to where a law enforcement officer has to read Miranda more readily. But right now, the actual law states the only time a police officer has to read you your rights is after arrest and if they want to ask you specific questions about the crime. Like if they haven't taken you into custody yet, or they're not asking you questions about the crime itself, Miranda doesn't apply. Okay. Um, so I just want to make that very clear because I get nobody wants to be taken to jail. And sometimes when I was a police officer, I'd be putting people in handcuffs and I'd feel them tense their muscles up and they start to turn on me. We all know what's coming next. We're in a tussle, right? And a lot of times it's like, you never read me my rights. Bro, again, the only time by law that you have to be Mirandized is once you're in custody and if the officer wants to ask you specific questions about your crime. Okay. Now, I want to, here's a scenario. Okay. Say you've been taken into custody and you're on your way to jail. The officer read you your rights. Okay. And he or she didn't ask you any questions. You just start feeling Jesus in your heart and you start talking. Okay. Because trust me, it happens. Can law enforcement or prosecutors use those statements against you? Yes, they can. It's what the court calls spontaneous utterances, and they can be used against you. Another pro tip, once you're in jail, assume everything's being recorded. So when you make that first phone call, and you call your mama, because that's usually what happens, or you call your baby's mama, and you start confessing or telling them, making statements that contradict what you might have said to the officer. All right, can the courts use that against you? Yes. Yes, they can. Okay. Now, back to self-incrimination. All right. There is what's called spousal privilege. All right. So, say I committed a crime, right? Say I robbed a bank, and then I told my wife about it. Okay. Could the state make my wife testify against me? No, they could not. She could choose to. So if you're gonna ride dirty and you want to tell your wife about it, you better make sure she truly is your ride or die. You know what I'm saying? But no, it's called spousal privilege, and the state cannot compel a spouse to testify against another. All right, they can choose to, but they can't be made to. However, say I committed a crime, I told my wife about it, right? But my cousin was also in the room. That third party, all right, negates spousal privilege. So just be aware of that. All right. Then people can start testifying against you because it was no longer privileged communication between you and your spouse if there's a third party in the room. All right. And also, there is an exception to the Miranda warning that I want you to know about. It's called the public safety exception. All right. Say we're looking for someone that kidnapped a child, or there's another terrorist type event. We did have one in Chattanooga a few years ago. And say or a bomb threat, and say we catch the suspect, but we haven't found the mom or we haven't found the child. Can we start asking them questions? Yes, they can. It's called the public safety exception. All right, even though we didn't Mirandize them. All right, but that's usually a decision that's made way above the street or patrol level. All right, guys, that is it. I hope you've enjoyed your Fifth Amendment. In a few days, maybe next week, we're going to go over the Sixth and Seventh Amendments. But again, if you think I got something wrong or you have some questions, feel free to drop me a line at aaron.yergan@gmail.com. It's aaron.yeargan@gmail.com. And also check out my buddy Jason Gwynn, Bunker Skateboards, and Steve Connerton. All right, Skateboarding Saves Lives. Check those dudes out. They're doing good things. All right, guys. Take care.